These great mythical beasts inspired both awe and respect, but also fear. The Sphinx can be seen in representations across cultures, from Egypt to Greece to India to Asia.
Every century or so, a question too old and too stubborn to die gets a new pair of eyes looking at it. The Great Sphinx of Giza has survived that cycle more times than any monument on Earth.
There aren't many creatures in world history that have such a lasting legacy as the ancient Egyptian Sphinx.
We know remarkably little about why it was built or even really what it represents.
Now, in 2026, an artificial intelligence called Grok has been placed in front of that same ancient riddle, and the picture it drew from thousands of years of evidence landed differently than most researchers expected. What Grok concluded about the Sphinx is not what the textbooks have been saying. This is the full story. The monument that has always refused to be fully explained. Stand at the edge of the Giza Plateau outside Cairo today, and the scale of it still hits differently than any photograph prepares you for. The Great Sphinx of Giza measures approximately 240 feet long and 66 feet high, making it one of the largest sculptures on Earth, carved entirely out of a single limestone outcrop that had been sitting in the desert for millions of years before any human hand ever touched it. The creature combines the body of a lion with a human head wearing a royal headdress, gazing due east toward the rising sun. That orientation was almost certainly deliberate, tied to ancient Egyptian beliefs about solar power and royal divinity. The mainstream archaeological consensus has long placed its construction around 4,500 years ago, during Egypt's Old Kingdom 4th dynasty. Most Egyptologists attribute the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafra, who ruled from roughly 2558 to 2532 BCE and was responsible for the second of the three Great Pyramids at Giza. The case for Khafra is built on proximity and physical context. The Sphinx sits directly beside the causeway leading from Khafra's Valley Temple up to his pyramid, and the Sphinx Temple positioned in front of the monument aligns architecturally with Khafra's Valley Temple in ways that suggest they were designed as a single ritual complex. There is also a piece of inscribed evidence that has carried weight for over a century. The Dream Stela, erected between the front paws of the Sphinx by Pharaoh Thutmose IV in 1401 BCE during the 18th dynasty, contains a partially damaged reference to a name that many scholars have read as Khafra, which would make it an ancient source connecting the pharaoh directly to the monument. The text surrounds the stela in the form of a divine vision, describing how the Sphinx appeared to the young Prince Thutmose in a dream and promised him the throne if he cleared the sand that had buried the statue. As a royal legitimization story, it follows well-worn patterns, but the name fragment it preserves has shaped scholarly opinion for generations. Yet the case for Khafra has never been entirely airtight. Some researchers have pointed out that Khafra's predecessor, Djedefre, his brother who ruled only briefly, may have commissioned the Sphinx as a memorial to their father Khufu. Others have argued that the facial features of the Sphinx bear a closer resemblance to Khufu himself, and that Khafra's causeway and temples may have been designed around an already existing statue, rather than alongside one being built from scratch, a limestone tablet discovered in 1858 by French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, now stored in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo under reference number JE2091, further complicates the story. The inventory. Stela dates to the much later 26th dynasty, around 670 BCE, and its text describes Khufu finding the Sphinx already buried in sand and carrying out repairs to it, which would place its origin before Khufu's reign, meaning it could not have been Khafra who built it. Most mainstream Egyptologists dismiss the stela as a later priestly invention designed to enhance the prestige of a local Isis shrine, rather than as accurate historical record, noting its language and theology fit the first millennium BCE rather than the Old Kingdom. But the tablet has never quite disappeared from the conversation, and for good reason. What makes the question of the Sphinx so persistently alive is that no ancient Egyptian text from the Old Kingdom period explicitly describes its construction, names its builder, or records the project at all. For a civilization that carved its deeds into stone with obsessive thoroughness, that silence is striking. Grok, when asked to process the totality of this evidence, weighed each piece with a dispassion that human debate rarely allows. And what it found points towards something that the archaeological establishment has consistently underweighted: the geological argument that the Sphinx is older than any pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. The water, the stone, and the argument that will not disappear. The story of how geology entered this debate begins with an independent Egyptologist named John Anthony West, who in the late 1980s noticed something that had been observed before but never formally tested. The body of the Sphinx and the walls of the enclosure surrounding it show a pattern of deep, rounded, vertical fissures that look entirely different from the horizontal weathering found on other Old Kingdom structures on the same plateau. West believed this pattern was caused by water erosion rather than wind and sand, and in 1990 he brought in a geologist to evaluate the evidence. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist and professor from Boston University, conducted a formal geological analysis of the Sphinx in the early 1990s and concluded that the erosion patterns on the body and enclosure walls were caused by prolonged precipitation and water runoff, not by the wind-driven sand that accounts for the weathering seen on the adjacent pyramids and temples from the same era. The distinction matters enormously because of what it implies about timing. The Giza region has been an arid desert for at least the past 5,000 years. Rainfall heavy enough to produce the kind of deep water erosion Schoch identified would only have been present during an earlier, wetter climatic period. That period, known as the African Humid Period or the Neolithic Subpluvial, ended roughly 5,000 years ago. If the Sphinx experienced those rains long enough to produce the erosion now visible on its stone body, Schoch argued, the core of the monument must have been carved well before that climate shift, placing its origins somewhere between 7,000 and 12,000 years ago. That estimate was supported by seismic data. Studies using sound waves to measure subsurface weathering beneath the floor of the Sphinx enclosure showed depths of degradation in the limestone bedrock consistent with Schoch's proposed age range. The seismic profile around the front paws also revealed underground anomalies, cavities, or voids that generated considerable discussion about whether chambers existed beneath the monument. In the 1990s, geophysicist Thomas Dobecki worked with Mark Lehner conducting seismic surveys near the Sphinx, and their instruments recorded what appeared to be large underground cavities beneath the monument's front section. Though subsequent investigation attributed these features to natural fissuring in the limestone rather than man-made construction. The mainstream archaeological response to Schoch's geological argument was sharp and sustained. The Sphinx water erosion hypothesis is rejected by the archaeological community because of evidence contradicting its conclusions, including the fact that there are no known human settlements from 10,000 BCE on the Giza Plateau, no associated artifacts, tools, or burials that would indicate a pre-dynastic civilization of the complexity required to carve such a monument, and no other Egyptian monuments from that era to compare with. Prominent Egyptologist Zahi Hawass has consistently argued that alternative explanations for the erosion exist, including the possibility that Old Kingdom rainfall, though much reduced from earlier periods, was still sufficient to account for the patterns Schoch observed. What Grok identified in reviewing this debate is that both sides have allowed their conclusions to run ahead of the available evidence. The geological pattern of erosion that Schoch documented is real and has been acknowledged even by scholars who reject his age estimate. The absence of supporting cultural evidence for a pre-dynastic construction date is equally real. The most defensible position, which Grok articulated, is that the Sphinx enclosure shows water erosion consistent with an earlier and wetter climate than has existed at Giza for the past several thousand years, and that mainstream chronology has not fully resolved how to account for that fact. The identity question and the age question are intertwined, and neither can be cleanly settled while the other remains open. Something else shifted recently that added a genuinely new dimension to the conversation. In late 2023, a team from New York University's Applied Mathematics Laboratory published research in the journal Physical Review Fluids testing whether a sphinx-like form could arise naturally through wind erosion. Applied mathematician Leif Ristroff and his colleagues showed that sphinx-shaped formations can emerge when prevailing winds erode a rock mass containing harder internal material, producing an undercut neck, raised head, and outstretched forms resembling a reclining animal. The research noted that the sphinx faces directly into the prevailing wind direction, consistent with a Yardang origin, and that such naturally occurring lion-like formations have been documented in deserts around the world. The implication is that ancient Egyptians may have recognized a natural rock feature that already suggested a reclining figure, then refined it into the monument that stands today, rather than carving the entire form from an undifferentiated block of stone. This does not prove any particular date of construction, but it adds a plausible mechanism for why the monument exists where it does and in the form it takes, what Grok actually found when it processed the evidence. When Grok was asked to evaluate the question of who built the Sphinx, it did not arrive at a single confident answer, and that in itself was the revelation. The pattern in which AI systems have been engaging with ancient mysteries is increasingly one of synthesis rather than selection, drawing threads together across disciplines that human specialists often keep walled off from one another. What Grok produced was not confirmation of any one existing theory, but a weighted probability assessment of competing explanations. On the question of the builder, Grok found that the archaeological evidence for Khafre remains the strongest single attribution, but that it falls short of the certainty with which it is usually presented. The proximity of the Sphinx to Khafre's temple complex, the stylistic elements of the headdress, and the architectural integration of the Sphinx temple with Khafre's Valley Temple all point in the same direction. But the complete absence of any Old Kingdom text directly crediting Khafre with its creation, combined with the inventory. Stella's claim that the monument predated Khufu, combined with the geological argument that the body shows weathering inconsistent with a 4,500-year age, creates a picture with meaningful uncertainty. Grok assessed the Khafre attribution as the most probable explanation for who gave the Sphinx its current face and integrated it into the funerary complex, while simultaneously flagging that the core body of the monument may have predated that decision by centuries or millennia. On the question of age, Grok concluded that the NYU Yardang research represents a genuine contribution to understanding how the monument may have originated, and that Shok's erosion analysis, while contested, has not been definitively refuted by any geological counterstudy that explains the same features by a different mechanism. The most intellectually honest synthesis, Grok suggested, holds that the Sphinx, as it currently stands, was shaped and integrated into the 4th Dynasty royal complex by Khafre, or possibly a close predecessor, but that the rock formation itself may have carried a lion-like profile long before any chisel touched it, and that the body of the monument may have been in its rough form earlier than standard Egyptology acknowledges. On the question of the underground anomalies, Grok aligned closely with the current scientific consensus. The seismic surveys that detected cavities beneath the Sphinx have been followed by investigations that traced those features to natural geological fractures in the limestone bedrock, rather than to constructed chambers. American mystic Edgar Cayce claimed in the 1930s that survivors of Atlantis built a hall of records at Giza to preserve their knowledge, predicting the chamber under the Sphinx would be discovered in the late 1990s, a prediction that was not fulfilled. Nothing fitting that description has ever been found. The exploration of the water shaft in the Giza Plateau in 1999, sometimes called the Osiris Shaft, revealed ancient corridors and chambers that were pre-existing natural features modified for use as burial spaces, but no hidden archive of pre-dynastic civilization. Grok evaluated the Hall of Records claim as unsupported by physical evidence and declined to treat it as a plausible explanation for the underground anomalies. What genuinely surprised many observers about Grok's analysis was its treatment of the recarving theory. Scholars, including Colin Reeder, who has published detailed geological analyses of the Sphinx site, have argued that the monument's enclosure shows weathering that predates the 4th Dynasty pyramids, suggesting the site was developed earlier, possibly during a period when more rainfall still reached the plateau. Reeder has proposed that the Sphinx was originally carved during a pre-Khafre phase of the 4th Dynasty rather than thousands of years earlier, placing its origin with Khufu, or slightly before, rather than in a prehistoric era. A 2024 academic study proposed that the Great Sphinx may have originally been a full lion statue that was later recarved, with the face of the king added subsequently, which would explain the proportional disproportion between the relatively small head and the massive lion body. Grok evaluated this as one of the more plausible alternative scenarios, noting that the disproportionate size of the Sphinx's head relative to its body is a feature that standard iconographic analysis of 4th Dynasty portraiture has difficulty explaining away. The scientists and Egyptologists who reviewed Grok's conclusions noted that the AI had done something that the specialized academic debate rarely does. It treated the geological, archaeological, and textual evidence as parts of a single question rather than as parallel tracks that never quite meet. The surprise was not that Grok produced a definitive answer, but that it demonstrated with unusual clarity why no definitive answer exists and precisely what evidence would be needed to produce one. Why the mystery stays open, and why that matters. The Great Sphinx has been studied for centuries by people with every kind of tool available to their era. Napoleon's expedition in 1798 brought the first systematic scientific attention. 20th century archaeology brought excavation, photogrammetry, and seismic surveying. The 21st century has added ground-penetrating radar, synthetic aperture radar scanning, and now artificial intelligence capable of synthesizing vast bodies of literature without the blind spots of specialist training. Each generation has reached the same conclusion. The Sphinx is not fully solved. That persistence is not a failure of science. It reflects the genuine complexity of a monument that was created in a period from which almost no written records survive. Carved from a material whose weathering history carries its own contested interpretation, and integrated into a royal complex that was designed by people who left no instruction manual. The Sphinx was repaired and restored by Thutmose IV around 1401 BCE. It was buried and re-excavated multiple times. Its nose was removed, probably in the medieval period, rather than by Napoleon's troops, as popular legend has long claimed. Its original surface was painted in vivid colors that are now entirely gone. What survives today is not the Sphinx as it was built, but the Sphinx after 4,000 or more years of intervention, loss, and time. What Grok's analysis ultimately contributed was a clarification of the edges of certainty. The Sphinx was almost certainly given its current royal face during the 4th Dynasty, most likely under Khafre, and most likely incorporated into his funerary complex as a deliberate architectural and religious statement, connecting the king to the sun god and to the protective power of the lion. That much the evidence supports. Whether the body was carved from scratch at that moment, or whether it built on an earlier form, natural or man-made, is a question that the geological record leaves genuinely open. Whether the enclosure shows water erosion from an earlier and wetter era is a question that the geological record also leaves genuinely open, because the competing explanations for the same erosion pattern have not been exhausted. For the broader public, the value of this kind of AI-driven synthesis lies not in the dramatic headline that science expected one thing and got another, but in the more honest recognition that the world's most famous unsolved monument is unsolved for reasons that are scientifically legitimate. The evidence is real, it is contested, and it points in more than one direction at once. That is not a conspiracy. That is what ancient history actually looks like when you get close enough to see the detail. And the Sphinx, as it has done for every generation that has stood before it, refuses to make the answer easy. There is also the forward-looking dimension of this conversation that rarely receives the attention it deserves. Scanning technology continues to improve, and Egyptian authorities have in recent years shown more willingness to collaborate with international research teams using non-invasive methods. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by Italian and French teams in the years leading up to 2026 have identified additional voids and structural anomalies around the Giza Plateau that have not yet been fully investigated. The Sphinx enclosure itself has not been exhaustively scanned at modern resolutions. What technology currently available might reveal, when given proper access and time, could shift the conversation in ways that neither traditional Egyptology nor alternative researchers have fully anticipated. The monument that has resisted definitive explanation for this long may yet offer new data to the instruments of a new era. Whether that data confirms, complicates, or overturns the existing consensus remains genuinely unknown, and that openness is perhaps the most accurate statement that can be made about the Great Sphinx of Giza in 2026. If you've made it this far, chances are you're the type who goes beyond the surface and actually wants to understand things deeply. We really appreciate you for that. Now, if you found this video valuable, please consider leaving a like and sharing it with someone who loves history, mysteries, or simply wants to understand the world a little better. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video like this one. We'll see you in the next one.